He wasn't born under the Hollywood lights. His story began where the air was thick and the drums never stopped, the kind of place where rhythm came before word. Years later, that rhythm would shake the foundations of American music. They called it obscene, they called it dangerous, but what they really feared was its truth. The sound of freedom disguised as bass, and at the center of it all was a man named Christopher Wong. The world knew him as Fresh Kid Ice, the Chinaman of Two Live Crew. The first Asian voice in hip-hop, the quiet rebel who fought the loudest battles. What happens when a dream dares to speak louder than the system trying to silence it? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. He came into the world far from the noise of America in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, where the days smelled of salt air and the nights belonged to drums. Christopher Wong was born on the 29th of May 1964, the 8th of 10 children. His parents, Lawrence and Evil, were Trinidadian natives of African and Chinese descent. Both grandmothers were black, both grandfathers Chinese, and from that blend came a boy who never quite fit anywhere, yet somehow belonged to every rhythm. His grandfather ran a restaurant downtown, the kind of place that never slept. They said he had 6 wives, all working the kitchen, each one part of a small empire of sound and laughter. That mix of tradition and chaos was the soundtrack of Christopher's childhood. At family gatherings, music wasn't background, it was ceremony. His relatives played reggae records, and the bass lines rolled through the walls like waves. Long before he found hip-hop, he found rhythm in the heartbeat of his home. At Catholic school, he was quiet, the kind of boy teachers liked because he never talked too much. But silence doesn't mean emptiness. One day, during morning prayer, he began to write his first rhyme, a small verse inspired by the ritual itself. It wasn't rebellion, it was curiosity, the spark of a creative mind searching for expression. That was his first taste of transformation, turning devotion into art. When he was 9, his parents left for New York, chasing a better life. They worked long hours, sending letters and promises back to Trinidad while Christopher and his siblings stayed with their grandmother. Those years taught him patience and the value of waiting for something worth believing in. Finally, in 1977, his family sent for him. They arrived in Brooklyn one day before the Great Blackout, the storm that turned New York dark for nearly 24 hours. Fires, looting, chaos. The city he had imagined as glittering and bright was covered in smoke. Yet beneath it all, there was energy, dangerous, electric, alive. He was a shy kid, and his accent made him a target. Boys at school teased him for looking different, speaking different. He was robbed once for his watch. That humiliation burned deep. So he began to lift weights, joined the football team, and built a body that demanded respect. But inside, he still felt like an outsider. What saved him wasn't strength, it was music. In the late 1970s, hip-hop was beginning to rise from the streets of the Bronx, raw and alive. He discovered Cool Mo D, Treacherous 3, and Busy Bee through mixtapes passed hand to hand. The beats felt like a language he already knew, simple, direct, human. After graduating high school, he joined the United States Air Force as a medical lab technician. It might have looked like a disciplined career move, but for Christopher it was another migration, a way to see the world and, maybe, find where he truly fit. The military base in California became his second classroom. That's where he met 2 men who would change his life. Mr. Mix, a DJ with a gift for 808 beats, and Amazing V, a lyricist from Brooklyn with a sharp tongue. Together, they started throwing parties on bass, mixing New York rhyme with California rhythm. It was raw, fun, and new. Mr. Mix had just bought a Roland TR 808 drum machine, the same one Afrika Bambaataa used for Planet Rock and Marvin Gaye used for sexual healing. That sound, heavy and hypnotic, became the heartbeat of their sessions. They recorded their first single, Revelation, but it was the B-side beatbox, written by Christopher, that caught people's attention. The bass was thick, the rhythm irresistible. It sounded like something the South had been waiting for. Copies of their record made their way from California to Miami, and that's where fate stepped in. Luther Campbell, better known as DJ Luke Skywalker, heard beatbox and immediately reached out. At that time, Luke was already a local promoter bringing major acts to Miami clubs. He saw potential, not just in the music, but in the energy behind it. He began booking them for shows, flying them out on his own dime. They were still enlisted soldiers, sneaking off base to perform. It was risky, but irresistible. The connection between their sound and Miami's nightlife was instant. When they finally stepped onto a Miami stage, the crowd erupted. The city responded to their music like it had been waiting for it all along: deep bass, playful lyrics, raw energy. Christopher, who now called himself Fresh Kid Ice, stood out immediately. In a genre still dominated by African-American voices, he was the lone Asian presence, unafraid and unapologetic. He rapped about life, sex, and fun, but underneath was something deeper, a declaration of belonging. That night in Miami marked the beginning of something none of them could yet define. The sound they created would soon be called Miami bass. For Christopher, it was more than music. It was identity. The boy who once wrote rhymes in a Catholic prayer book had found his voice, and the world was about to hear it. By the mid-1980, Miami was changing. The nights grew louder, the clubs stayed open longer, and somewhere in the middle of it all, two live crew became the city's pulse. Fresh Kid Ice, with his soft Trinidadian accent and steady flow, stood on stage next to voices far rougher than his, and somehow, that contrast made him unforgettable. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he was the one who grounded it, the quiet rhythm beneath the chaos. When Luther Campbell officially joined the group, part hype man, part businessman, things began to accelerate. Luke didn't just understand the music, he understood how to sell it. No label wanted to touch them, not with lyrics that raw and humor that unapologetic. So Luke built his own. In 1986, he founded Luke Skywalker Records, the first black-owned hip-hop label in the South. Together with Fresh Kid Ice, Mr. Mix, and Brother Marquis, they turned rejection into revolution. Their single Throw the D hit Miami like thunder. It was more than a song, it was a cultural earthquake. Every club DJ, every car stereo, every street corner had that 808 boom rolling through it. The song turned the city's underground dance, "Throw in the D," into a national catchphrase. And for the first time, the South had a sound the rest of the country couldn't ignore. Then came We Want Some P, another unapologetic anthem that pushed boundaries even further. The record went viral in a pre-internet world, passed hand to hand, copied on cassettes until the labels wore off. The crew sold 500,000 copies independently, pressing their own vinyl, packaging them by hand, and delivering them to stores themselves. Every dollar was earned, not granted. In an industry that often ignored Southern artists, that independence was an act of defiance. Fresh Kid Ice stood in the middle of it all, not the face of the controversy, but the heart of its endurance. His presence was different. In a time when hip-hop was almost exclusively black, he represented a kind of inclusion that hadn't yet been named. Reporters called him the Asian rapper, as if the novelty mattered more than the man. But inside the group, his credibility was unquestioned. He wrote, performed, and lived the same grind as the rest: long nights, endless shows, and laughter that covered exhaustion. They began touring with acts from New York, the same artists who once looked down on Miami's rawness. When two live crew opened for Run DMC in Mississippi, tensions broke wide open. According to the crew, Run DMC's management tried to cut their set short. Luke responded not with anger, but with music. He told Mr. Mix to scratch Peter Piper over the crowd while chanting back at the headliners. The audience sided with the crew. That night, it was clear hip-hop no longer belonged to one coast. The South had entered the room. Their debut album, The Two Live Crew Is What We Are, went gold without radio play. That kind of success was unheard of. Yet with every hit came more pushback. Stores refused to stock their records. Parents protested. Censors called their music obscene. But controversy has a way of turning into curiosity, and curiosity sells records. Each scandal only made them bigger. And then, tragedy struck. In 1988, Fresh Kid Ice was in a car accident so violent it nearly took his life. His arm was torn from the socket. Doctors wanted to amputate. He refused. He said he needed that arm not for vanity, but for rhythm. Months later, he returned to the stage, arm in a brace, gauze wrapped tight beneath his sleeve. Every night he performed in pain, but he never let the crowd see it. When the beat dropped, the hurt disappeared. Their second album, Move Something, hit the Billboard charts that same year, going gold once again. The sound was heavier, the shows wilder, and Fresh Kid Ice, now both survivor and star, performed like a man who knew how fragile fame could be. He wasn't chasing glory anymore. He was proving that he still belonged. Against the odds, against the pain, he stood there, a living rhythm refusing to fade. By 1989, the world finally caught up to the sound that Miami had been building in secret. The third album, As Nasty as They Wanna Be, wasn't just music, it was a cultural explosion. From the first beat, it declared war on silence. The cover said everything. 4 men in Miami Hurricanes jackets, 4 women kneeling on the sand. The image was bold, vulgar, funny, and fearless, the perfect reflection of who they were. The single Me So Horny hit like lightning. Built on a sample from Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, the song turned a movie quote into a national phenomenon. It climbed to No. 1 on the Billboard rap chart, cracked the Hot 100, and even reached overseas charts in Europe. Every college dorm, every car stereo, every party that song was there. And yet, as their fame spread, so did the outrage. To some, they represented everything wrong with the music industry. To others, they were the very definition of freedom. Fresh Kid Ice watched it all quietly. He wasn't the headline maker that was Luke's job, but he was the constant presence, the steady rhythm in the middle of chaos. When police began arresting store owners for selling their records, he saw something deeper than scandal. He saw fear, the kind of fear that rises when art dares to speak a language society isn't ready for. In Florida, a judge ruled the album obscene, making it the first record in American history to be legally banned. The Broward County Sheriff threatened to arrest anyone who sold it. 2 live cruise shows were raided. Luke and Fresh Kid Ice were handcuffed on stage for obscenity. Cameras rolled, headlines flared, and behind those flashing lights stood a soft-spoken man with his arm still half numb from an old accident, wondering how something born from fun and rhythm had turned into a fight for civil rights. But they didn't back down. They fought the law in court, arguing that music, no matter how explicit, was protected speech. Scholars like Henry Louis Gates, Jr. and artists like David Bowie defended them publicly. Bowie even said he went out and bought the album just to stand against censorship. The crew won. The court ruled that their lyrics, however crude, were a form of comedy and art. Freedom of expression had triumphed over fear. Then came another battle, this time over copyright. When they released Pretty Woman, a parody of Roy Orbison's hit, they were sued for infringement. Luke took the fight all the way to the Supreme Court. The ruling that followed changed the entertainment industry forever. The justices decided that parody could be protected under fair use. Without that victory, shows like Saturday Night Live and even the remix culture of today might not exist. Fresh Kid Ice was there through it all, often overlooked but never absent. While others shouted into microphones or faced reporters, he lived the quiet reality of what it meant to fight for art. He didn't talk about politics or theory. He just showed up, night after night, performing through pain, defying the silence that tried to swallow him. In 1990, their fight turned into triumph when they released Banned in the USA, sampling Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA with Springsteen's Blessing. The song became a rallying cry for freedom of speech, the sound of a generation that refused to be censored. When they performed it live, even the critics had to admit something bigger than controversy was happening. Fresh Kid Ice had become part of history, not just as the first Asian rapper, but as a symbol of resilience. He had crossed borders of culture, genre, and expectation. Yet fame, for him, never looked like victory. It looked like survival. Each time the world tried to silence him, he found another way to keep the beat alive. Success didn't arrive quietly. It came with flashing lights, federal lawsuits, and platinum plaques. By 1990, 2 Live Crew had done what no Southern rap group had ever done. They forced the nation to listen. The courtrooms that once condemned them now helped make them legends. And for Fresh Kid Ice, the quietest man in the room, it was surreal. The boy from Port of Spain was now standing inside the headlines of American music history. When Atlantic Records offered Luke Campbell a $16 million deal, it was more than a contract, it was validation. The label that once refused to touch their music now wanted their sound, their controversy, their rebellion. The group took the same raw energy that got them banned and turned it into banned in the USA. The single, sampling Bruce Springsteen's anthem, became a statement. Springsteen himself gave permission to use his song, no fee, no conditions. He understood that what they were fighting for wasn't indecency, it was artistic freedom. The song hit number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the rap chart. The video played like a documentary of defiance, flags, headlines, and the crew marching through the storm they'd created. Fresh Kid Ice wasn't in the front shouting slogans. He didn't need to be. He stood there with his brace, half smile, half pain, a living symbol of endurance. For him, the fight had already been personal long before it became political. That same year, they became the first hip-hop act to release a live concert album. Live in Concert captured the chaos that defined them: sweat, laughter, chants, and the electricity of an audience that refused to sit still. No pyrotechnics, no choreography, just pure performance. For many, it was the closest hip-hop had come to punk rock energy. Every show felt like rebellion disguised as a party. By 1991, they were at their commercial peak. The follow-up album, Sports Weekend, As Nasty as They Wanna Be Part 2, went gold. Their single Pop That Coochie dominated radio, and their music appeared in blockbuster films New Jack City, Boys and the Hood. It was ironic. The same sound once banned from airwaves was now soundtracking Hollywood. The underground had become mainstream, and the outcasts had become icons. Fresh Kid Ice watched it all unfold with quiet disbelief. Fame didn't change him. It simply surrounded him. He saw how fast the world could turn applause into silence. He'd already lived through pain most couldn't imagine: surgeries, nerve damage, addiction to painkillers, yet he showed up every night, ready to perform. The arm that doctors once wanted to remove still moved to the rhythm. The body that shouldn't have survived still carried the beat. In interviews, he spoke little about fame. He talked about music, about respect, about how strange it was that people still questioned whether Two Live Crew counted as real hip-hop. He knew the answer didn't matter. History would decide. They'd already done what no one else had. Created a Southern sound that reshaped the nation, defended the First Amendment in court, and turned humor and sexuality into instruments of protest. There were moments, backstage after shows, when the cameras were gone, and it was just the crew sitting in silence. Luke with his business plans, Brother Marquis with his sharp laugh, Mr. Mix tinkering with beats, and Fresh Kid Ice the quiet center, rolling another gauze around his arm. Success had brought money and recognition, but also distance. The more famous they became, the less they felt like the brothers they once were. Still, for a brief moment, they stood at the top, untouchable, unfiltered, unforgettable. The world finally knew their names, even if it didn't fully understand their story. For Fresh Kid Ice, it wasn't about glory anymore. It was about proof that he had survived everything they said he couldn't, and somehow, the beat still hadn't stopped. Fame rarely arrives alone. It comes with shadows longer, quieter, and harder to escape. For Two Live Crew, the glow of success soon began to burn. The money that once felt endless became a reason to fight. Contracts blurred, ownership became a question, and brotherhood turned into business. In interviews, they smiled, but behind closed doors, trust was slipping away. Luke had become a mogul, expanding Luke Records and building an empire. He was still the loudest voice, the face of the movement. Mr. Mix, the architect of the beats, wanted recognition for his sound. Brother Marquis, the sharpest lyricist, wanted credit for the words that shook America. And Fresh Kid Ice, quiet, loyal, and patient, stood in the middle of it all, watching the group that felt like family begin to fracture. His body was already paying the price for success. The arm injury never healed, not really. It ached every night, and the painkillers that once helped him perform had become a quiet addiction. He never made excuses, never let the crowd see him wince, but those who knew him could tell. After the shows, he would retreat backstage, unwrapping his brace, the gauze soaked through, and replace it in silence. It was his ritual, his private war. The fame around him only deepened the loneliness. Reporters still called him the Asian guy in the group, as if novelty mattered more than talent. He didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that silence carried its own kind of strength. But that label, that single word, Chinaman followed him everywhere. What had started as pride in his heritage became a reminder of how outsiders are often remembered only by difference. By 1992, Two Live Crew was falling apart. Lawsuits over royalties, endless touring, exhaustion, everything that had made them powerful now tore them down. Luke was worth millions. The others claimed they barely saw their share. Mr. Mix and Brother Marquis left, suing for unpaid money. Fresh Kid Ice stayed, maybe out of loyalty, maybe out of stubbornness. Either way, he chose to keep the name alive. He turned inward, recording his first solo album, The Chinaman, released that same year. For the first time, he told his own story unfiltered, unapologetic, and deeply personal. The album wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a declaration of identity. I wanted people to know who I was, he later said. Asian, hip-hop, and proud. It became the first American rap album to embrace Asian heritage as part of its message. It didn't top the charts, but it broke barriers the industry didn't even recognize yet. Yet success couldn't hide the pain. Years of touring, stress, and substance use were catching up. His health began to fail, fatigue, dizziness, infections from his old injuries. The man who once defied doctors was now being defeated by his own body. Friends noticed he was drinking more, sleeping less. Still, he refused to slow down. He believed in work as medicine. He believed that if he kept moving, the pain couldn't catch him. But it always does. Fame had turned to pressure, the applause into echo. The group that once changed American law was now remembered mostly for controversy. The laughter that used to fill their dressing rooms was gone. Fresh Kid Ice kept creating, but something in his voice had changed slower, lower, as if each verse carried more weight than air. Behind the headlines, the man who once stood for freedom of speech was quietly fighting for his own survival. Hollywood had moved on. The charts had new kings. And the beat that once shook the world now echoed mostly in memory. He would keep making music, keep performing, keep believing, but the cracks were already there. Success had given him everything he thought he wanted. Now it began to take everything else away. The fall didn't come suddenly. It crept in one illness, one betrayal, one night too long on the road. After the breakup, Fresh Kid Ice tried to start over. His solo debut, The Chinaman, carried pride, but behind the pride was exhaustion. The years of constant touring and the weight of being the other guy in every photo had left scars deeper than the one on his shoulder. By the mid-1990, his health began to unravel. What started as pain in his arm turned into infections that never healed. He felt weak, lightheaded, and tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Doctors told him his body was failing under the stress, too much pain medication, too much alcohol, too little rest. Still, he kept recording. He once said, "If I stop moving, I'll stop living." When Luke tried to resurrect Two Live Crew in 1994, Fresh Kid Ice came back loyal as always. They released Back at Your Ass for the 9 to 4, and for a brief moment it felt like old times. Crowds still screamed their names, even if the world had changed around them. But the unity didn't last. The same arguments over money returned, sharper than before. By the time they reunited again in 1995 for Hoochie Mama on the Friday soundtrack, the group was running on fumes. The song hit big, the movie went to #1, and the soundtrack topped the charts. But behind the scenes, nothing was fixed. The lawsuits, the resentment, the unspoken pain, it all followed them. After that, they split again. Fresh Kid Ice, tired of the chaos, signed with Little Joe Records and tried to rebuild. He never stopped creating. Music, for him, wasn't about fame anymore. It was the only thing that made the world make sense. Then came the quiet years, the ones the headlines never covered. He released Still Nasty in 2000, Stop Playin' in 2003, Freaky Chinese in 2004. But behind the studio walls, his health was slipping faster. He was diagnosed with high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and liver disease. Years of medication and fatigue had taken their toll. The man who once stood unbreakable on stage now struggled to climb stairs. He didn't tell many people how bad it was. Pride kept him silent. Friends said he looked tired. He just smiled. His second marriage was falling apart, and the painkillers that once kept him performing had turned into a quiet dependency. He slept in his van at times, drifting between studios and motels, holding on to the only thing he had left: the music. In 2009, on Thanksgiving Day, he suffered a stroke. The following year, another. When doctors told him he had cirrhosis of the liver and likely 2 years to live, he laughed softly, as if time had never been something he owned anyway. Still, he kept recording, even when his hands trembled. He said the microphone made him feel alive. But those who saw him knew the truth: the fight was turning inward. The same man who once battled censorship in courts was now fighting his own body, one day at a time. The years that followed were not kind. By the late 2000s, Fresh Kid Ice had become a man haunted by his own legacy. He had been a pioneer, a survivor, a symbol of freedom, but now he was mostly a man in pain, trying to make peace with the life he had lived. The crowds were smaller, the interviews fewer. Fame had long moved on, but he was still here, carrying the weight of what it once meant. After his second stroke in 2010, his doctors told him to stop touring. His liver was failing, his lungs were weak, and the medicine that kept him alive also drained his strength. He was diagnosed with hepatic encephalopathy, a condition that affects the brain when the liver begins to die. It made him forget words, lose focus, drift mid-sentence. Sometimes he didn't recognize himself in the mirror. For a man who had built a life around rhythm and rhyme, that was its own kind of tragedy. But even as his body gave out, his spirit refused to. Brother Marquis found him sleeping in a van outside a Miami studio one night, frail, sick, and nearly out of money. When he asked him what he was doing there, Fresh Kid Ice just smiled and said, "Still chasing the beat." Moved by what he saw, Marquis convinced him to reform Two Live Crew as a duo. Not for glory, but for survival. They recorded again, just to help him pay bills and get back on his feet. The music wasn't chart-topping anymore, but it meant something deeper. It was proof that even when everything else fell away, the rhythm remained. The same man who once performed in front of thousands now recorded in small studios with borrowed equipment, his voice rough, but still steady. Every verse felt like a goodbye he wasn't ready to say. There were good moments, too brief, human flashes that kept him going. In 2010, he stood on stage at VH1's Hip Hop Honors, the Dirty South edition, recognized as one of the pioneers of Southern hip-hop. For a moment, the lights felt warm again. The applause wasn't just for the music, it was for the endurance, for a man who had turned pain into rhythm and rhythm into legacy. In 2015, he released his autobiography, My Rise to Fame. It wasn't bitter, it was humble, reflective, and full of gratitude. He wrote about the fight for free speech, about Luke, about the accident, and about the price of survival. If I had to do it again, he wrote, I would, even the pain. But pain, unlike fame, doesn't fade. The infections worsened, his liver began to collapse, and his lungs filled with fluid. On the 13th of July 2017, Christopher Fresh Kid Ice, Wong Won, passed away at a Veterans Affairs hospital in Miami. The official cause was cirrhosis of the liver and respiratory failure. He was 53. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from Luke, from Brother Marquis, from fans who had grown up sneaking his tapes into Walkmans. The news didn't dominate the headlines, but those who knew, knew. The man who had fought for the freedom to speak, to create, to be seen was finally at rest. For Fresh Kid Ice, the silence that followed wasn't defeat. It was peace, the kind he had been chasing his whole life. When Fresh Kid Ice passed in 2017, the world didn't stop. There were no massive tributes on national television, no glossy retrospectives in the Sunday papers. But in corners of the internet and hip-hop forums, YouTube comments, and late-night radio shows, people remembered. They shared stories, old footage, photos from shows in Miami where the crowd moved like a single living thing. They remembered his voice, calm but confident, sliding through bass lines like someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. It's easy to forget how much he changed the landscape. Before Two Live Crew, the idea of Southern hip-hop barely existed. Miami was seen as a place for beaches, not beats. But when Throw the D and Me So Horny hit the airwaves, everything shifted. That 808 heavy, low-end sound, now known as Miami bass, became the heartbeat of a new generation. You can still hear it today, in trap music, in club anthems, in the swagger of every artist who learned that rhythm could speak louder than melody. Fresh Kid Ice was there from the very beginning of that movement. His verses were playful, but his presence was revolutionary. He didn't look like what hip-hop was supposed to look like. In an America that still sorted identity into boxes, he didn't fit any of them, a Chinese Trinidadian immigrant in a black rap group that terrified mainstream America. He didn't hide from that difference. He wore it. He named it. He turned it into power. The name Chinaman, which critics once used to define him, became a badge of pride. In 1992, he released The Chinaman, making him the first rapper in American history to openly celebrate Asian heritage in hip-hop. Decades before there were Asian American artists on major labels, before social media gave marginalized voices a platform, Fresh Kid Ice was already there, building bridges through rhythm. Today, artists from all backgrounds, Dumbfounded, Aquafina, Rich Brian, and so many others trace their lineage back, consciously or not, to that first moment when he stepped on stage and said, "I belong here too." He didn't kick the door open with anger. He did it with presence. That's harder. That lasts longer. But his legacy is about more than representation. It's about freedom, not the slogan kind, but the lived, fought-for kind. The battles two live crew faced in the late 80 seconds and early 90 seconds reshaped how the United States defined artistic expression. When the government tried to censor their lyrics, they didn't just defend themselves, they defended everyone who would ever make art considered offensive. The Supreme Court case that followed Campbell v. A Cuff Rose Music, Incorporated became a cornerstone for fair use in parody and creative work. Without that decision, modern satire and remix culture might not exist in the same way. Late-night comedy, meme culture, TikTok remixes, even independent documentaries, they all owe something to that ruling. Fresh Kid Ice was there when it happened, not in a suit or on a podium, but in the music that started it all. He never claimed to be a hero. When asked years later about those court cases, he said, "We were just trying to make music. The rest happened because people got scared." But history doesn't care about intent. It remembers impact, and his impact was undeniable. In Miami, the sound he helped build still defines the city's identity. You hear it in DJ sets, in bass festivals, in the way the windows rattle down Ocean Drive on a Friday night. The 808 never left. Neither did his spirit. The same kid who once arrived in Brooklyn during a blackout became the man who lit up every dance floor in the South. Beyond America, his story resonated quietly but powerfully. In the Caribbean, where he was born, he became a symbol of possibility, proof that you could leave a small island and still shape the sound of a nation. In Asia, hip-hop fans spoke his name with pride, the first to do it, the first to stand up and be seen. For young artists who felt invisible, his existence alone was revolutionary. In 2010, when VH1 honored two live crew at the Hip Hop Honors, the Dirty South edition, the applause carried a special weight. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was recognition delayed by decades. That night, the industry that once banned them now celebrated them. Fresh Kid Ice stood there, smiling quietly, his arms still braced but his head high. He didn't need to say much. His story was already written in every bass drop that shook the room. And yet, there's a melancholy to his legacy. While others profited, he struggled. The man who helped shape an entire genre died without wealth, without stability. His life, like his music, was raw, brilliant, but unfiltered. Still, that honesty is what keeps his story alive. When younger artists talk about authenticity, about staying true to their voice no matter the cost, they're echoing him, even if they don't realize it. Fresh Kid Ice didn't just break barriers, he lived inside them, stretched them, and showed what was possible beyond them. He proved that hip-hop could come from anywhere and belong to anyone. His journey reminds us that greatness doesn't always look polished. Sometimes it limps. Sometimes it aches. Sometimes it performs with gauze wrapped tight around its wounds and still gives everything it has left. Today, when we talk about pioneers of hip-hop, his name is rarely first. But maybe that's fitting. True pioneers are often the ones who never needed to be seen, only heard. He was never chasing headlines. He was chasing the beat, the same one that carried him from a small island to the center of American pop culture, the same one that still echoes in clubs and car speakers and memories. He may not have lived to see the full recognition he deserved, but his fingerprints are everywhere in sound, in freedom, in courage. And if you listen close enough, you can still hear it, that low, rolling Miami bass, rising like a heartbeat, steady and unbreakable. Fresh Kid Ice didn't just change music. He changed what it meant to belong. There's a moment in every song right before the beat drops when silence feels alive. That's where Fresh Kid Ice still lives, somewhere between the sound and the memory, between what was said and what was felt. He was never chasing fame, he was chasing freedom. Freedom to speak, to laugh, to offend, to be. The kind of freedom that makes art dangerous and necessary. For decades, people tried to silence him, record stores banned him, judges condemned him, critics mocked him, but he never stopped. Even when his body failed, his voice didn't. Even when the world forgot, the music remembered. Christopher Wong was more than the first Asian rapper in hip-hop history. He was proof that difference can be strength, that rebellion can be love, and that sound, pure, honest sound can outlive the ones who make it. When you listen to today's music, the trap beats, the remixes, the humor, the openness, you're hearing the aftershocks of what he and 2 Live Crew began. They fought for expression so the next generation wouldn't have to. And that's the quiet kind of heroism that rarely gets statues, but changes everything. There's something beautifully ironic about his story. He started in silence, a shy boy in Catholic school writing rhymes under his breath, and he ended surrounded by noise, not the noise of fame, but of freedom, echoing through decades of artists who learned to speak without fear. Hollywood never gave him the glossy ending he deserved, but maybe his legacy doesn't belong there. It belongs in the streets, in the clubs, in the laughter of anyone who ever turned up the volume just to feel alive. It belongs to the people who know that art, at its core, is defiance. So the next time you hear that 808 shake the room, remember the man who helped make it happen. Remember the courage it took to be seen when no one wanted to look. Remember Fresh Kid Ice, the Chinaman, the survivor, the rhythm that refused to fade. If you believe his story deserves to be remembered, hit subscribe, share this video, and keep his name alive. Because some legacies aren't about charts or awards, they're about echoes that never die. Some stars never fade. They just shine where fewer eyes can see.